Let's talk to the psychologist, Honey Lancaster-James. Honey, welcome to you. I suppose on one level, this is that for some people this will be counterintuitive. For many others, it won't be. I just wonder what's at play here, whether actually what's happening is a vector, that if you're already in a fairly happy relationship, happy family setting, being exposed to more of it will produce more happiness, and the opposite holds true as well.
Yes, well, social psychology would teach us that there is some truth in what you're saying, that if you're already in a relatively successful and functioning relationship with someone, then this could sort of heighten that, and you're likely to enjoy the close proximity and sort of take strength from one another, and that will help to reduce stress. But we're not just talking about intimate relationships and romantic relationships. There's a whole host of relationships that are being affected by lockdown, some of whom might be actually within your own household. And for some families, that might increase levels of conflict or levels of stress between parties. But it also might increase a sense of teamwork, cooperation, this kind of shared goal of getting through this together and having a kind of common enemy, albeit an invisible enemy, can actually strengthen bonds between people who see themselves as being on the same team and on the same side. And then there are other relationships that I think take on more importance at a time like this, and that can be perhaps distant relatives or elderly family members who you might previously have been a little bit complacent about contacting them. And of course, when something like this is going on, what can happen is that unfortunately it can be a bit macabre, but there can be this sense of actually we could run out of time to be able to spend time with that person. And so it can make some people think, actually, I'm going to pick up the phone or I'm going to get on a video call and I'm going to spend time with grandpa or grandma or whoever it is. So there's definitely a kind of impetus on
Yeah.
relationships in that regard.
Honey, it's going to be really interesting, isn't it, in the months and years to come when the academic papers get published on some of this. I mean, for instance, on the point about children, 23% parents' relationship with children improving, set against 10% is deteriorating. I mean, you know, my experience of watching my own children at home, I was braced for a series of knife fights. And instead, actually, there's far more harmony than I might have predicted. I wonder whether, actually, in the fullness of time, we will see that some of the epidemics of modern childhood, whether that's, you know, depression, obesity, bullying, self-harm, all that stuff, might actually reduce. Is that just wishful thinking, do you think?
Well, I think for some, it's possible. I mean, some of the things that we know about the development of children is that they very much benefit from spending time eating meals together with the family, spending sort of downtime, actually being allowed to get bored and be creative. Those kinds of things, if you like, could be a real benefit, because I think we were living in a time before this where children's lifestyles were quite prescribed. There was a lot of kind of after school activities, parents working, being out of the home. Some of that I think will change under this new normal, with parents working at home more. But on the other hand, of course, parents are very stressed and there's a lot of financial difficulty that this is bringing. And we know that some children, unfortunately, will be in homes where they're not safe, and actually they're losing out on time that they might have benefited from going to school or even having school meals. So it's not going to be the same for every family. And I think you're right that what's going to be key is really looking at this in the long term and seeing how it's affected and how it's changed people's lives. And for some, it's going to be very, very difficult. But for others, I think there probably will be a few hidden benefits. And some of it is coming from those improved relationships. Children, for example, staying at home with their families and getting more quality time with their parents, or perhaps it's just getting to know your neighbours. I know I've got to know my neighbours more through this crisis. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we want to be focusing on right now. The glimmer of hope is that some of our relationships will undoubtedly be improved because of all of this.
I wonder, Honey, whether you think that we in the media perhaps obsess a little bit too much about the bleak stuff. I mean, we've carried a lot today for entirely understandable reasons about domestic abuse, people phoning hotlines. I mean, clearly there is a problem where there are vulnerable people, chaotic households, things are going wrong, the wheels come off, the police get called, dreadful things are happening. And we know that that's exacerbated by lockdown. But I wonder sometimes if we obsess a little bit too much about those darker stories when actually we ought to be looking for a more balanced picture, and maybe you're offering it. What say you?
Well, I think that those things are happening, and far be it from me to be glib about that. There are many, many people really struggling through this. But if you're asking me if I think that the media perhaps sort of loads the balance in of bad news, then yes, I think it does. And certainly some studies have shown that the more news that we consume, if we're constantly watching it, it's not good for our mental health because it does tend to focus on the shocking or the terribly troubling and terrible events in the world. And for as many times that there are difficulties going on, there are also good things going on, people coming together and people supporting one another. And I would love to see a future where the media, if you like, is more balanced and reports on both negative news and also good news, perhaps even a segment, specifically for that, that where we say, look, this is where we're going to tell you all the awful things that have been going on, but this is where we're going to tell you all the good things that have been going on. And I have seen a little bit more of that
OK.
happening during this time, focusing
Honey,
on our carers and our heroes, for example.
yeah, we've noticed that too. Honey, got to leave it there. Really appreciate your time. Honey Lancaster-James joining us there.